Hello, my name is Stephen Thomas. Have you ever wondered where Apemen fit in with God's plan? Now, for many years this puzzled me. Why should there be these so-called primitive missing links in man's evolution? And as a creationist or as a believer, surely that poses a bit of a dilemma. And evolutionists always take ape men or links between apes and men as evidence of evolution. Now, I'd like to give you my theory of where ape men fit into God's plan and how they don't contradict with a creationist worldview. So let me just briefly say what I believe. I believe that the universe is 13.75 billion years old and that the Earth is half that age, as is our solar system and sun, etc. So God created the universe a long time ago, and stars developed, and if you want to look at my previous video on how the universe evolved, please do. But Earth only cooled about 3 or 4 billion years ago, and then there were these various ages which the geologists talk about, and these various ages had different types of flora and fauna, or different types of plants and animals. And then there were times when certain animals dominated. For example, you might find dinosaurs dominating a certain time, and then the mammals. And only fairly recently have these guys appeared in the fossil record. And these are the names that come up when you start talking about human evolution. Now, I don't believe that humans evolved, or that in fact anything evolves, but I must qualify that. I do believe in a form of godly evolution. I believe that 6,000 years ago there was a mass extinction, and God created a whole new set of plants and animals on Earth, including Homo sapiens, modern man. Now, before that, before 6,000 years ago, and before the great destruction that occurred then, which left the earth without form and void and in darkness and covered with water, etc., there flourished these various Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo gaster, etc., Homo ancestor, all these different types of what we find skeletons of these different animals and species. And I don't deny them. Why deny them? They were there, but they existed before modern man was created, before the mankind who was created to have a relationship with God. God experimented with these different creatures. Now, to some it sounds almost blasphemy to say that God experiments, but if we look at Psalm 19, it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork." And the firmament is the earth. We see God's handiwork. What is God interested in at any particular time? And the fossil record shows God's interest varied. At certain times, he was very interested in these huge, monstrous animals, the dinosaurs. How big could they get? How big could the trees get? And then God seemed to lose interest in that, and as he became closer and closer to creating man, he was creating more and more different types of prototype men. For example, the Neanderthals. Those guys had bigger brains than ours as a average. So God was experimenting with humans. The earth is where his workshop is. So God, although he sits and designs and thinks up these creatures, it all comes together, and he puts them together, and there's only one place where he tries them out, and that is Earth. And we see the results of God's experimentation on Earth as these different plants and animals. Now, what's so interesting in the fossil record is, after one era, let's take the CT boundary, the Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary, you get wiped out. All the dinosaurs virtually disappear. And then you get a completely new set of animals. You don't see a gradual evolution between those reptilian type of animals and the mammalian type of animals. You just see, then nothing, and then the new animals. So it's not like you see millions of intermediary species between the new creatures. You get one layer of completely different animals, followed by a next layer of completely different animals, and sometimes there's a layer of nothing in between. So every time there's a mass extinction, of which there have been many in Earth's history, God creates a new whole ecosystem. And we see that 6,000 years ago, God created a whole new ecosystem. And then 1,600 years later, there was a flood, and God wiped out all the pre-flood people, and a very similar ecosystem was allowed to continue because Noah had saved all those animals on the ark. But why did God create these different types of ancestors? These Lucy and Peking man and the Neanderthals and, the various names of human ancestry. He was experimenting. He was seeing how well each of these species worked. And just as he experimented with dinosaurs to see if this big one with a long tail and this one with big jaws and small legs and this one that can, huge animals that fly and with teeth in their mouths flying like bird-like creatures, and how big he could get them. He was experimenting, he was playing around. And God hasn't finished creating. He will create ad infinitum. There will be new creatures. Into the future there will be new creatures. There's been no sign that God has run out of ideas for new plants and animals. And that is why I think 1% of all the plants and animals on Earth today, 1% of all animals and plants that have ever existed exist today. 99% are extinct. They can be found in the fossil record. God is playing with creatures, and every time you go to a National Geographic Animal Planet type of program and you watch how intricately interwoven these different animals, this animal pollinates this particular flower and only that animal, how everything interrelates, it just shows you the wonder of God. So we who believe in creation should not feel threatened by these so-called missing links. It shows that just before God created modern man, created him to have a relationship with him, he was experimenting with different animals. Now let's suppose he was playing with Neanderthal and he found Neanderthal was too rough, too clever, too whatever. He may have dumbed him down a bit. He may have toned down his muscles. He may have found this species has gone a bit too far and would be a threat to humans. So when you look at the plants and animals that are on Earth today, they're not the huge dinosaurs and animals that can kill us so easily. We are living among small creatures that are suitable to us, beautiful plants, fruiting things that will supply for our needs, flowers that are aesthetically very pleasant, and calm, tame animals, because God created man to have dominion over the earth, and it would have been very hard for man to have dominion over dinosaurs because they're too big for us. And they would have been counterproductive to what he intended for us. So I say that when we see all these different groups of hominids, we should not feel threatened by the fossil record. We should say man was on God's mind, and that is why just before 6,000 years ago, up to even 40,000 years ago, God started really getting interested in man. And if Earth is his workshop, you started seeing a lot of experimental prototype humans appearing different places and spreading out and so on. And God was watching how they function, watching how they interact. Because God wants humans to be, as he says, my sheep. He compares followers to sheep, not goats. Goats are very independent. Sheep have to have a certain dependency on him. He wanted humans that are dependent. He wanted them sociable. He didn't want them all to hive off and be isolated and solitary creatures. He wanted them to have this sort of herd instinct, peer pressurized. He wanted them to have a yearning and a relationship with each other and with him. He wanted them to, like we do, we love our pets, to want relationships even with the animals and so on. So people might say, but God doesn't experiment. Well, I challenge you to prove that. We see through the fossil record God experimenting. I just have to go and have a quick look at the fossil record and you can see how God has experimented with plants and animals that have died out. he's either lost interest in them, or he's found out all he needed to, or they were magnificent at the time, but they're not suited for now. So I say the fossil record proves God does experiment, and he will continue experimenting. And it's not like humans are an experiment. I think that humans were what he really had in mind when he got the earth habitable, and he got enough oxygen on the earth, and he terraformed the earth, starting off with little algae that increased the oxygen content of the earth, and he got the right climate for the earth, and only at the perfect time and conditions, we could say the Goldilocks time and conditions, when it wasn't too hot, not too cold, God created man, and he's got a 6,000 to 7,000 year plan to create sons who are dependent upon him. But he was experimenting with seeing how they moved, how they interacted, how strong they were, how they coped. Were they depressed? Were they suicidal? Were they too aggressive? And I totally believe that God does experiment and play around, even, we see it with other fossils, even with our human ancestors. And in this sense, God guides evolution. It's not like things just happen by themselves. God is playing. And then when he's tired of playing with this group of animals, mass extinction creates a whole new. And they all fit perfectly together. It's a whole new wonderful ecosystem. And when he created man, it was just perfectly right for salvation, the salvation of man. Or was it? Because you find pre the flood, there was Abel, and there was Enoch. Those were the only two, and Noah, who were saved. So maybe conditions weren't perfect for salvation before the flood. That's why God wiped them out. Mass extinction. Lost interest in those people for after 1,600 years, no people saved. And then he starts again after the flood with the old covenant. And he tries and tries and tries, and he experiments, and he sees not too many people are being saved even under the old covenant. This idea of maybe using one nation as a model example to bring people to him wasn't working. Ends it. Starts with a new covenant. New covenant. We're all part of God's nation. And now under the new covenant, people are flooding to be saved and to find God. And so I say that even in recorded human history, you almost see an example of God experimenting. God said if the old covenant had worked, he would have stuck with it. But because it didn't, in Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, he said he created a new covenant. So maybe the old covenant wasn't working so well, so he tweaked it and came up with a new covenant. Why would he need a new covenant if the old covenant was working with its laws and a sort of a regulated life? But people couldn't cope with this regulated life. They weren't able to. Not that there's anything wrong with a regulated life, it's just that they were a little bit weak. So I say, just as God has experimented with the covenants and with salvation of human beings, and now it seems is the absolute perfect time for people to come to him with freedom of religion, the internet and so on. Almost every place in the world has access to the gospel, and it says that when the gospel's preached throughout the world, then the end will come, which is another mass extinction, and that will end this particular stage of God calling people to salvation. But again, I say, God has guided animals and plant creation throughout the ages, and this confuses scientists. They think this is evolution. They think they cannot acknowledge that God guided it because they're scientists. They're supposed to be empirical. They can't believe in anything they can't see. So by their very definition of science, they cannot believe that God has guided things, so they have to invent evolution theory. But if you take it that God has guided everything, including playing with different species of hominids before he created modern man, then we have no conflict with science. And I believe in science, and I believe in God.